And belief is what drives people's decisions. And then I started to unpack belief, and I realized, wow, this has to do with people's desires. So their desires drives their beliefs, and their beliefs drive their actions, period. It's as simple as that, and it's as complex as that, because people are unaware of this. You know, we're walking through life not thinking about everything that we do. It's impossible. So we're being pushed and pulled by our environment, and we're just trying to make it through the day, have a decent day, have nothing go wrong, and at the end of the day, flip on Netflix. And that's what's going on in the marketplace. So when you get somebody to adopt what you do, all they're doing is switching one belief for another belief and then going back on, autopilot.
I'm Srini Rao, and this is the Unmistakable Creative Podcast, where you get a window into the stories and insights of the most innovative and creative minds who've started movements, built thriving businesses, written best-selling books, and created insanely interesting art. For more, check out our 500-episode archive at unmistakablecreative.com. Tom, welcome to the Unmistakable Creative. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
It is great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so it's really cool to have you. I came across your book, as I had mentioned to you before we hit record here, by way of a really sort of ridiculous and out there reading project that I am working on right now, which is to read every book ever recommended, written by or about a billionaire. And somehow, in all that searching and all that research, your book ended up on my radar, so I ordered it right away, and I devoured it in like 2 sittings. But before we get into all of that, I want to start by asking you, what social group were you a part of in high school, and how has that impacted the choices you've made with your life and your career?
I've never been asked that question, and I've been on a lot of podcasts. I have an interesting answer for you, as a matter of fact. I was not part of a particular social group. I hung around with the jocks. I played football. I hung around with the geeks. I was on the chess team. I hung around with the druggies. I hung around with everybody, and I connected with all of those people. And I guess you can say that that's informed my career, because I'm interested in everybody, and I was like a chameleon back there in high school. Nobody looked at me and say, "Oh, he's one of those." I was one of everything. So that's what I was in high school.
What did you learn about human behavior from each one of those groups?
That it's really similar, that people are driven by their desire to feel good about themselves in the presence of other people, and that they move around based on that desire. If they don't feel good about themselves in one place, they'll go someplace else until they do find people that help them feel good about themselves. So that's what I learned about that, is that we're all driven essentially from the inside out, and we're all on the inside the same.
It's interesting because I've thought about sort of, my own work and how much time over the last probably 10 to 12 years I've spent doing a significant amount of inner work that seems like it's just an essential foundation for external results and outer work to actually happen. And I'm curious, why you think that is the case, and why that sort of inner work isn't something that is integrated into our earlier lives.
That's interesting, because I think that assumption that you're making makes you feel good about yourself. That's why you made. I would say that many people that succeed in the external world really do very little inner work. And I think that that's why when they get to a certain point where they have everything, houses, boats, vacation homes, various relationships, they start feeling this lack in their life, that they're missing something. I think that if you start when you're young by doing this inner work, then no matter what comes to you through the external world, you'll be fulfilled as you get there. So I wouldn't connect those two things, but I would connect it with a feeling of fulfillment and an ability to kind of roll with what the marketplace and the world gives you.
It's interesting. Part of me, after hearing you sort of echo your sentiments, I think back to it and I'm kind of like, yeah, maybe when I was that young, I would have just written it off as a bunch of new age bullshit and wouldn't have really cared. I don't think I was self-aware enough to think there would be any value in this.
Well, you weren't self-aware because people were pounding on you to focus on the other self, the external self, the ego, the identity of make sure that you have money and respect and that people value you and the whole social game. Mm-hmm. Nobody ever started with you and said, look, there's two games. There's this social game, but there's this other thing over here called the universe, your inner self, your authentic self. And you have to figure out, how do I put myself in this game, the social game, and still value my inner self and do what drives me without doing what I need to do to get the attention of the external world. Because listen, when we're born as babies, that we survive because we become masters at getting other people's attention and approval, period. Right? If we don't cry, if we don't coo, if we don't whatever, we're not going to eat. We're not going to get a blanket put on us. So we're driven from that point on to worry about the external world, what they're thinking and how they're feeling about us. Nobody ever says to you, hold on a minute. We're not living in the jungle. We don't have to survive that way anymore. We're living in a modern world. And you have to look at what drives you if you want to have a fulfilled life and focus on that. And yes, understand how the external world works, but don't let that thing grab onto you and drag you along, because you'll wake up someday and you'll say, holy, I never lived.
So walk me through sort of your trajectory in terms of how you've ended up doing the work that you've done, through your life and your career, like from high school to now.
Okay. What trajectory? What does that mean? That doesn't mean straight up, because I can assure you it was never. Okay, I'll walk you through the wandering path.
But that I appreciate even more, because I was literally writing about that this morning, like the difference between a straight line and a fully lived life.
Yeah, you'll find it pretty interesting. I mean, I was leaving college during the worst recession. I mean, there were lines at the gas station. Interest rates were, I don't know, up around 18%. Everyone was just trying to get a job. And I had an economics degree, and I was interviewing. And one of the companies that I was hoping to get hired by was, Procter & Gamble. That was like a dream. And I didn't get that. I didn't get hired. Anyway, I left school, and I decided, because I had an interest in it, to become a professional magician. So I spent a couple of years doing that, and I enjoyed it. But then, it became, okay, I've got to go out and have a real life now. I didn't see myself being on a stage in Vegas or anything. And I took a job with GE at one of their, at the time, they had purchased an electronics manufacturing firm. And I was working there in manufacturing, in planning, probably about 4 years in, and then Jack Welch came in and took over as CEO of GE, and he said, look, we're going to be one or two in the market, or we're going to get out of these businesses. And our company was one of the businesses he wanted to get out of, so I participated with a bunch of managers, and we did a leverage buyout of the company from GE. And I stayed there 6 more years, and I ended up having like a problem with everyone there, because it felt like we were the living dead. There was no one really driving the place. It was driven by technology, but not by a vision. The vision was just make money, and I couldn't take it anymore. So I left, cashed in my investment, and I joined a startup medical device company. And once I got involved with it, at the start, it was a couple of guys, a dog, and an idea. And we grew that thing. We had VCs all over the country coming to us, wanted to take us public. And God, it always seems to happen. I ran into a vision collision with my partners again because of greed, frankly. It's funny. Partners do really well when there's no money. As soon as there's a lot of money, that's when problems start coming into play. So I left again, and I went out and I hung a shingle, and I was doing some strategic advisory work for some big brands. And I don't know. This was the strange little instance. Doing this work, I started to notice that a lot of executives, managers, they were talking a really good game, but they didn't really understand the concepts behind their words. And I was sitting at the breakfast table, and I was watching my daughter eat cereal. She was probably 7, and she was looking at a spoon, flipping it back and forth, and raising her eyebrows. And she looked at me, and I said, "Andrea, what are you doing with that spoon?" And she said, "Daddy, how come when I look at the spoon this way, I'm right side up, but if I turn it around, I'm upside down?" And I looked at her, and I mean, almost immediately, the words convex and concave started to pour out of my mouth. And then I caught myself, and I said, "You have no idea why that image is flipping upside down and right side up. You're giving her words. You're just like these executives at all these companies. They know how to throw around big words, but they don't really know the essence of what they mean." So I don't know. I had some wild idea. I said, I'm going to write a book. It's called Sandbox Wisdom. It's going to be about a CEO who loses his way in work and in business, and by a chance meeting with a little girl, rediscovers his creativity, his passion, and turns his business and his life around. And this was way before, self-publishing. And I said, I'm just going to go do this thing. And I did it, send it out to some publishers. They came back with some ridiculous, make it shorter. It was only like 100 and something pages. And I said, the hell with it. And I printed thousands of copies, and I just put them in envelopes and started sending them to every CEO in the country. And something funny happened. All of a sudden, I started getting calls to come in and talk about these concepts to these organizations. And it just kept growing and growing and growing. So I started cutting back on my consulting work, and I did more education and speaking, and that was it. And that was probably 15 years ago, 16 years ago. And since then, I've written 6 additional books.
Wow.
So that was the weird, serendipitous, crazy path.
Okay, so many questions about this. The first off, is when you make the transition from something like being a professional magician to applying for a job at GE, what in the world is the interview process for that like, and how do you explain that backstory? Like, in a job that probably seems to be completely irrelevant to the one that you were doing.
Yeah, I don't even know if I told them. I think I just walked in there and said, "Hey, look, these are my qualifications. These are what my degrees are in." And I probably interviewed well. And they said, "Okay." I mean, it was an entry level position. They said, "Okay, we'll take a shot. You seem smart enough, self-starter." And that was it. And then once I get into something, I'm going to dig as deep as I could possibly dig into it. As a matter of fact, the company was bleeding, hemorrhaging money. Inventory levels were skyrocketing, and I had to get at the essence of this. So this was way, way back before, ERP and just-in-time inventory and agile and all that. And that's what I led this team to bring all that to this manufacturing company, which turned the whole place around. So to me, it's pretty simple. I try to take I'm not really good with the social game, but what I really am good at is understanding how things work. So I try to get at the essence of why things work and why they don't, and then try to apply that to whatever I put myself into. Sometimes I run into the social game problems doing that, because when you change things, people have a real hard time with that, because there's a potential that it's going to change something that they like about their work or their job. And, they will do something to try to prevent that. I've learned that lesson, for sure.
So you mentioned this idea of a vision collision that you had with multiple partners. And I guess the question for me is, how do you actually determine what a vision looks like? I mean, is there a process for that? Like, how can you get a vision that is find a vision that is in alignment with your own personal values, I guess is a real question.
Yeah, well, listen, I never go into anything with money being my goal. So that when that turns into a goal, that's a vision collision to me. I go into something to change something, to matter, to make a difference, to provide meaning, to help people, whatever. If money flows out of that, great. That means that I did it right. If it doesn't, okay, I go on to something else. But the minute I see money turn into the goal, and part of the vision collision with my partners was, oh, no, we're not going to reinvest this money into this new product development. We're going to take money out. We're going to buy cars for each other. We're going to do, I said, okay, I'm gone. I can't deal with that. It doesn't even make any sense. You know, you're playing a game. You're trying to help people. You're trying to use that cash to create. And to me, that's what life is. It's about creation, not accumulation.
So I don't know about you, but vacuuming is not one of those things that I ever look forward to doing. But as you know, your environment has a huge impact on your creativity. So I still like it to be clean wherever I'm living and working. But now it doesn't have to be something that you deal with. If you're like me and you grew up in the 80s, you probably fantasized about the day when cleaning your house would be like it was for the Jetsons, meaning you don't have to lift a finger. Well, the good news is that we're already kind of living in that future. And the easiest way to make sure your floors are clean every day is with the iRobot Roomba Robot Vacuum. It cleans up after itself. The Clean Base automatic dirt disposal takes convenience to a new level, automatically empties its own bin into an allergen lock bag that holds 60 days of debris and traps 99% of pollen, mold, and dust mites, so you can forget about vacuuming for months at a time. Let the Roomba clean for you instead. It learns your home, finds dirt, and empties itself on its own. It's got powerful cleaning performance made effortless. Remember, if it's not from iRobot, it's not a Roomba. To learn more, go to irobot.com/unmistakable. So why is it you think that we have such a strong emphasis on accumulation in our culture? And just overall sort of, I mean, we live in a very consumer-driven culture. So based on your internal narrative, I'm curious why that is.
Well, because that's how we've set up the game. So we're born as these fear-based creatures who don't think we're going to survive. So we really always think, you know, that we're not going to make it. We're going to die. We're going to live in a box. You know, we're completely fear-based. And what we want is we want to feel good emotionally. So what the marketplace does is they set you up with this belief. If you do these things, then you'll feel good emotionally. And so you do all these things and you get there and you go, I don't feel so good. And then they flip it on you. Well, it's not those things. It's these things. They've changed. Now you have to have these things. And so all you have to do is just go talk to some of these Hollywood stars that have made millions of dollars, that have millions of fans, and say, did that make you happy now that you're there with the millions of dollars and all these fans? They say no. So we don't seem to figure out until late in life, after we've gone through this process, that is not the route. That's not the path. As a matter of fact, there's no there, because you're already where you need to be. You just need to tap into that creativity and that passion and what drives you, and have the courage to do it without looking at it and saying, yeah, but I had somebody telling me, I really want to do this. I said, well, do it. And the answer was, I can't imagine what the business model is. And I said, well, then you're dead. I mean, you're dead from the inside. If you can't allow your inside and your passion to drive you, if everything has to be a business model, then it's over for you, because everybody that's out there has some business model. And they're not all working. So something else has to drive people. And I think you need to be driven from your inside out, not from your outside in. What do you feel like doing? What's bothering you? What do you think you can fix? Now go do it. And I don't mean to sound like Elon Musk. I mean, I don't have the guts he has. But that's exactly what he's doing. That's exactly what Amazon is doing. The guy didn't say, I got a business model to sell books. He's doing whatever drives him to provide value for people.
You know, it's funny you say that. There's a quote in Peter Diamandis and Stephen Kotler's book, Bold, where it was specifically from Jeff Bezos. He said, you know, missionaries in the long run do a lot better than mercenaries.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, that's very well put.
Well, let's do this. Let's shift gears and let's talk start talking about sort of the idea of the business of belief, like where this came from, what the seed was for it, because that's the book that actually ended up on my radar. So I'm really curious kind of what the seed was. And then I want to talk about the practical application of this in our lives and in our work.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, I don't write books because I have an idea for something that I think is going to sell. Mm-hmm. I end up writing a book because something's bugging me. I can't figure something out. So I'll sit down and try to figure it out. And then sometimes it comes out in a book. Just like I said with my first book. It wasn't like, oh, I got an idea. I think I'll go write a book about a guy. No, it was bugging me that everybody was saying one thing and they were doing other things. So this case, with belief, I was out consulting, doing some consulting work with some really, well-known brands. But beyond that, these were like companies that people would love to work for because that's the type of people they were. And I was trying to help these people grow their businesses so that they could continue to do even better work. And I remember I gave a presentation to a strategic team, and I was there for days. And then I came back and visited a year later, and I gave a keynote at one of their annual events. And then I was sitting down after my talk with the CEO at a table up front, and I was watching them present things that they were doing. And honestly, it was almost opposite of what I had taught them. And I could not understand that at all. And I looked at the CEO and I said, listen, this isn't what I was paid to do. I taught you opposite this. And the answer I got was, listen, Tom, you got to understand something. When you left here, everyone had to go back to their jobs. And I got this look like, don't ask me any more questions. So I didn't. But I flew home and I sat at my desk and I couldn't understand what that meant. What does that mean? They had to go back. They understood, but they had to go back to their jobs. So I said, okay, this is interesting. If knowledge isn't what gets people to change, so information doesn't get people to change, what is it? There must be a concept. And I started digging into this philosophically, psychologically. I read every sociological, anything I could put my hands on to try to figure this out. And what I figured out was that there's this thing called belief. And belief is what drives people's decisions. And then I started to unpack belief. And I realized, wow, this has to do with people's desires. So their desires drives their beliefs, and their beliefs drive their actions, period. It's as simple as that, and it's as complex as that, because people are unaware of this. We're walking through life not thinking about everything that we do. It's impossible. So we're being pushed and pulled by our environment, and we're just trying to make it through the day, have a decent day, have nothing go wrong, and at the end of the day, flip on Netflix. And that's what's going on in the marketplace. So when you get somebody to adopt what you do, all they're doing is switching one belief for another belief and then going back on, autopilot. So I said, okay, I'll write a book about this so I can help people. Now, this is the paradox. This is how people typically operate. But I'm not saying that you should. I'm saying, if anything, you should not have any beliefs. You should question everything, if you could, in your life. Don't grab on to anything, because as soon as you do, that kills curiosity. That stops learning. Belief is the end of thinking. As soon as I believe in something, I don't have to think about it anymore. So I would tell you, don't do this. But I need you to understand this is what most people do.
Wow. Okay. That raises many, many more questions. I think you opened up a rabbit hole here for me. The first one is about awareness. You said most people are not aware of these things. So I'm curious, what in your life have been things that have enabled you to cultivate awareness about beliefs, about desire, in your own experiences?
Well, listen, my history from childhood till today, I have seen people with all kinds of different beliefs looking to try to make their lives better. And I haven't seen a particular one, like the belief, or here it is, here's the one, grab onto this. So because of that, I realized this is all subjective. These things that people are grabbing onto, they're grabbing onto to make themselves feel good. And if that doesn't make them feel good, they switch to something else. So I realized that there is no one objective product, service, group, whatever you want to call it, that people should adopt. And if there were, then there wouldn't be an alternative. The whole human species would say, yep, this is the one. But it doesn't work like that. So if that's true, then all of these things are nothing but conditional assumptions. And it's nothing that you should grab onto. If something looks different, makes more sense to you, you should examine it. You shouldn't dismiss it because you have a belief. But see, that's what people do. As soon as something that they believe in is attacked, you're not attacking their belief, you're attacking their identity. And as soon as you do that, they get this thing called cognitive dissonance. They cannot hold that other thought that you just gave them in their mind. And so they dismiss it. And you can take this and apply it to organizations that hear about something that's happening in the marketplace, but they don't want, it's against their identity, so they dismiss it. And before you know it, they get taken out by somebody else that's innovating. So this whole idea of a belief, this story that you create, that this is the way the world is or should be or where it's going, that's the thing that gets you disrupted, either as an individual or as an organization.
Wow. So one of the things that, the subtitle of the book was how the world's best marketers, designers, and salespeople, coaches, fundraisers, educators, and entrepreneurs, and other people get us to believe. Which to me sounds, when I thought about it, I was like, okay, this is about persuasion, but I realized it was about so much more. I'm curious, kind of, like, how do they get us to believe, and what is the take? Like, how do we get other people to believe in us? I guess is really the question.
Yeah. So the first thing to understand about human beings is that they're not rational thinking machines that are consciously out in the marketplace or in the world trying to figure things out. That's not, we're more like any other creature in nature. We're being pushed and pulled by our perceptions. We see something, and if that somehow draws us in, either it's something unexpected or it's something that we look like we might want, then we'll investigate it. But if nothing grabs us like that, we are much, much too busy to be stopping and examining things. So people who are great at this, they understand that. And the first thing they do is they grab us. They emotionally grab us because we are driven by our feelings first. Our thinkings come along afterwards. Once we examine something and we say, God, I think I might like that. That might improve my life. That might be better than what I've got. Once we do that, once that feeling of wanting is created, then the thinking mind comes along to eliminate any risk and to validate that feeling. And that's why you give people all the evidence, right? So this is where people have it backwards. They think evidence persuades people, moves people. It does not. Feelings and desires move people. Evidence does nothing but support that feeling and desire. Evidence gives you permission to go do that. So everyone that leads with evidence, they just don't know what they're doing. And it's unfortunate because there are a lot of great companies with a lot of great products, and they're just not getting the attention, and they're not stopping people because they don't understand how people create these impressions in their minds. They think, I'll load them up with data, like I do a computer. They'll run it through some kind of rational program, and they'll see that we're better than the other guys, and then they'll choose us. Doesn't work like that.
So can you give us some examples from your own work where you've kind of applied this and seen sort of outcomes in people's lives and in their work based on this?
I'll give you a perfect example. When I was running my medical company, and then let me preface it by saying I teach this to organizations, all right? But let me give you a potent example of what happened to me and how I learned this. When I was running my medical company, I had a ventilator, state of the art, which kind of worked opposite of everyone else's, which people tell me was impossible, even though I had people using it and they were benefiting from it. So I ended up through a sales force. I was hooked up with this big distributor. They had a sales guy create a meeting at one of the leading teaching institutions on the disorder that we treated in the world. I said, wow. And they said, yep, come on out, give a presentation. There'll be 14 physicians there. Let me tell you, all I had to do is get those 14 physicians or that one leading physician who published everywhere in that room to look at this product and adopt it, and it would have taken off. I fly out there. I'm waiting in this room. It's noon. All of a sudden, 12, 14 doctors walk in wearing scrubs, stethoscopes. There are sandwiches on the table for them. They sit down. They start eating. One guy looks up to me, and I could sense, let's get this thing going. We got to get back to our rounds. So I take all of the data I have, and I'm putting it up on an overhead projector to show you how long ago this was. And I'm showing the data. And it was patient data. We did studies, at a leading institution, all of this data. And I got done, and I looked around, and I said, oh, that went well. I mean, there were no questions about the data. And then this leading researcher looks up from his sandwich at me, and he said, Mr. Asacker, are you the president of the company who developed this product? Now, that was like one of these rhetorical questions you don't want to hear, because he knew I was. And I said, yes, doctor. And he said, and you came to my teaching institution with such shoddy clinical data? Okay, I look, the sales guy, he's trying to climb under a table, right? This is how he's feeling. I don't know what in the world he means. And then it hit me. This was just maybe because I was freaking out. I don't know. But it hit me. What he meant was not that my data wasn't good, but it wasn't a lot of data. And man, if you want to make an impression with a leading institution, you better come in there with 10,000 patients, not with 100 or whatever we did. And that's what prevents a lot of small medical companies from making it in the marketplaces. They can't afford to study 10,000 patients. But they had the more is better data mentality, information data mentality. So I had no way of fighting this guy. So I looked at him and I said, doctor, do me a favor. He said, sure, what is it? I said, turn to patient 10. So he turned his papers to patient 10. Everybody else followed along. They went to patient 10. And there's a bunch of squiggly lines, okay? Medical, polysomnography, different kind of heart rate. Just, it looks like squiggly lines to the novice. And I used that word. I didn't do it on purpose. This was all spilling out of me. I said, do you see those squiggly lines? I said, those squiggly lines are Bob Jones, because you're supposed to maintain patient confidentiality. I didn't even care at that point. I said, Bob lives in a little house, a little white house, picket fence, 2 adorable little girls, a wife who loves him. I said, Bob, no product on the market could help Bob. My product saved Bob's life. I said, so the minute you care more about numbers and data than you do about people's lives, that's the minute you should get out of medicine. And then I looked at all the other doctors, and I said, every one of you should get out of medicine. And I picked up my product and I turned around, and trust me, my knees buckled. I could feel sweat pouring down my back because I figured, okay, I'm out of a job. I got to shut down the company. You know, the sales guy's under the table. I've got to grab him by the hand and walk him out the door. Okay, fast forward. Every teaching institution I went to, every hospital I visited, they said, are you the guy that told the doctor that if the minute he cares more about numbers than people's lives, the day he should get out of medicine? I turned into a rock star. Beyond that, that doctor, who was affiliated with no manufacturing companies, agreed to sit on my board of advisors. So trust me, it's not data and information that drives people. It's their feelings. It's their desires. His inherent desire was to help people. And I turned that back on in him by telling him, I don't care what you think. I'm here to help people. So I've learned this lesson. It's taken me a long time to learn it. And I'm trying to help other people understand it and learn it and apply it, especially if they have something that can benefit people.
Wow. This has just been incredibly thought-provoking, as I kind of expected it would be. So I have two final questions.
Okay.
First, obviously as an author, I'm guessing you yourself must be a voracious reader. So I am curious if you could recommend one book to our audience, what would it be, other than your own?
I can't recommend.
Which we will definitely link up.
I would recommend my new one, but what one book? See, here's the crazy thing. If I knew that there was a book that had the answers in it, I would say, okay, this is the book. So when you ask me what one book to get what results, or what one book for what reason?
Yeah.
See that you see what I mean? I mean, if it was
a question of what one book had a profound impact on your life, would even that still doesn't exactly help.
No, exactly. Like, okay, I would say read Krishnamurti's Think on These Things. It'll open your mind, because that's what you need to do. You need to be woken up, because this is a big illusion. This world that we're walking through, that everybody takes so seriously, because we don't, another book is The Denial of Death by Becker, because that's what we don't think we're going to die. It's like nobody talks about Steve Jobs anymore. How come? You see? And he knew it. He said, remembering that you're going to die is the best way to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You don't have anything to lose, because we're not going to be here forever. Do what turns you on. Follow your heart. But what's happening is data, because of information technology, we're being beat to death by data. Everybody wants proof. We want proof of the future. I've seen people get their ideas shot down because they couldn't prove what the future was going to give. That's the craziest thing in the world. We have to get back to what made all of these great brands great, which was somebody with some burning passion to do something to improve people's lives, and get away from this notion of running our organizations by data. Use the data, but only once you're driven by your heart. Then bring the data in.
So I have one last question for you, which is how we finish all our interviews at the Unmistakable Creative. What do you think it is that makes somebody or something unmistakable?
What makes them unmistakable? Oh, you've been in the presence of unmistakable people. You can see the passion that lights up in their eyes for what they're doing. They have this boldness about them, but they also have this gentleness, because they understand the game. They're not stepping on people. They get it. But they're not letting anyone step on their vision either. I think that's what makes these people unmistakable.
Well, I think that makes a very fitting way to wrap up our conversation. And for everybody listening, we will wrap the show with that. Next time on The Unmistakable Creative.
I don't think projects fail. I don't think people don't build a business or don't make art because they should have put in 100 hours this week and only put in 30. Mm-hmm. I don't think that happens. I think people put things on the shelf, or they say, I'll get around to it. And it's like, get around to it right now. Go put 10 minutes in. I think the eventual target you want to hit is at least 2 hours in the morning of like most important important work. Mm-hmm. And then another 2 hours in the afternoon. That's only 4 hours. Everybody I know that does 4 hours on like whatever's most important every single day is very successful.
Sebastian Marshall joins us to talk about building systems that increase productivity and creativity.